Good evening. Hello, and thank you for joining us again. And I'm so thrilled to be able to do this every week and to spend time with you and hopefully answer some of your questions. And I'd like to welcome very, very much Grandmaster Doug Cook.
Thank you, Master Adams. Kamsahamnida.
You're very welcome, sir.
Hello, everybody. Glad to see you again tonight.
Yes. So, let's have a seat. I've got some great questions.
Yes, sir.
I want to discuss some things. May I get you some tea first?
Yes, sir.
All right.
I really enjoy that.
It has turned into a nice ritual.
It certainly has. Thank you. And it's really welcome after a very strong Pomse class.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Kamsahamnida.
Chupe.
Chupe.
That's so good.
Okay. So, we have, I promised myself and a couple of the people that I would not start the session without doing a Stump the Grandmaster question.
Oh, no.
And I must say, this is a really interesting and difficult question. So if you don't know it, I will understand.
If you don't know it, I'll say it.
Yeah. So it's from Dr. David Dempster. So you know this is a good question. And he says, what do the three seeds in the laurel leaves on either side of the Mudokwan emblem represent?
Well, I know some of the leaves themselves do the continents, but the three seeds, I should know that, and I did know it. I'm not sure, and I don't want to guess.
Okay.
Did he give an answer?
Yes, he did. He said they stand for 3,000 li, which is the distance running between North and South Korea.
Good. I wouldn't have known that. We can edit that out, though. Good question, Doctor. Excellent.
They were a great question.
You
Thank
stumped the chump. Okay.
I don't like to say that because, you know, I'm not sure that everybody understands why we keep a certain decorum, especially in this dojang. And it's something that sets us apart from a lot of other schools. And to me, the advantage is clear. When we go to Korea, we know how to act. We know what to say. We know how to bow. We know when to bow. We know how to show respect. And I don't see that in other places. I don't know if you...
Well, you know, the thing about that, and Master Adams, I'm so glad you bring those type of things up because you word them exactly the right way. You know, you frame them the right way. You know how to act, not just do a low block or a punch. You know how to act. You
Correct.
Know what decorum is. And that's a function of the fact that we're a professional martial arts institute, right? And that denotes education. So you would expect that the teachers and the collegium within that academic setting would be knowledgeable in their fields. And in order to do that, sometimes you need to take field trips. You know, you have to get outside the dojang and see how the art is embraced in other areas. And no place better than the epicenter of Taekwondo, which is South Korea, right?
Yes, that's right.
So as you know, we've been there 9 separate occasions for long periods of time, training every single day from day to night, and from morning until night. And couple that with the fact that my particular education came from a Korean master. Well, we've been immersed in the concepts of Asian philosophy. That and the fact also that the minds of our students have been open and embraced Asian philosophy, not turned away from it like so often happens. So for the great majority of our students, they do understand that there's more to the art than just the performance, but also the behavior, right?
Correct.
Now, I just so happen to have a copy of the Kukiwan textbook here.
Yes.
And I brought it this is the newest edition, the 2006 edition. And I brought it with me tonight because there was a question that I did know was coming that I wanted to do a little bit of research on. And I did, but I look through this book all the time because it's literally a wealth of knowledge. And there's an entire section on how you should act in the dojang, how you should interface with your master and your grandmaster.
A whole chapter.
Invaluable to read this to our students, but I may be cheating you, and the only reason I say that is because I don't want you, and I'm talking about my students in general, to get the feeling that what we do here is a cult. It's not a cult. No one is drinking Kool-Aid here, What we're trying to do is remain as authentic and to offer our students a genuine form of traditional Taekwondo.
Yes.
Not sport Taekwondo, not modern Taekwondo, although we're sensitive to that. But we're trying to infuse you with the deepest traditions and the deepest actions of Asian philosophy when we do that. But by my telling you that you should really approach your grandmaster or your masters with almost unflinching blind devotion, that triggers something in the Western mind that's very scary.
Right.
And they're saying, oh, this is despotic, and they're trying to make me into something. No, none of that is even close to coming to the truth. So in a way, I take responsibility for possibly a deviation from that tradition. But you should typically, when you're having a conversation like this, start from the top and then work your way down, And what I mean by that is Chosun has a wealth of instructors. We have 21 instructors that didn't happen by accident.
Yeah.
And it's not just because Master Adam gets a black belt that we wave our hand over him and say, now you're a teacher. That's not the way it works. Great black belts who have wonderful technique can be terrible teachers. And wonderful teachers who can't kick above the waist can be excellent teachers, right? So we take those who truly show a propensity for teaching, and we cultivate them into great instructors, right? So we've, over the years, cultivated 21 great instructors, and we had many more before some of them have gone off to college. So my feelings is that I should start talking to our instructors a little bit more deeply about that etiquette of Asian philosophy and let them also explain it to the students. That's kind of delegating power the way it should be, So I think maybe at our instructor classes we're going to talk a little bit more about that and save this forum for something more general.
Okay.
But suffice it to say that we do not, in Chosun and the USTA, we don't believe in the Moses complex, right? And the Moses complex is where the Grandmaster goes to his teacher or her teacher and gets some wisdom and then comes back and won't allow these people to interface with that person. We never did that with Grandmaster
Correct.
Chun. Everybody was open from our youngest child all the way up to our
that's right.
oldest and highest black belt to interface with Grandmaster Chun, right? I didn't hide him from anybody. It's like Moses getting the tablets from God and coming back with them and not letting anybody. It's not the way it works here, so we're very democratic in nature.
Right. And I also give you credit that you teach so many classes, and that's not the usual, especially in Asia. Is that not correct?
You're absolutely correct. And, we talk a lot about reading material in the last few classes. So I took the liberty of bringing a few books in here tonight just to show you.
Great.
And one of them, of course, is one of the more inspirational books and this is a great time to read it, too. This is Grandmaster Chun's autobiography. It's called Taekwondo Spirit and Practice Beyond Self-Defense. And in it, he starts speaking right at the very beginning about his years at the Mudokwan.
Right.
And his teacher, as many of you know, is our great-great-grandfather here at Chosun. Our grandfather being Grandmaster Chun, and his teacher being our great-great-grandfather. His name was Grandmaster Chung Soo Hung. And he talks about how Grandmaster Chung Soo Hung would stay off to the side or in his office, and his senior instructors would be teaching the class, and very rarely would he come out. And when he did come out, he would sit on the sidelines with his arms crossed, and he would observe, and then he would make comments to his teachers. and the teachers would go ahead and carry out his wishes. Many of my colleagues' schools are the same way. The masters don't teach at all, but their teachers do. My hope is to continue teaching physically until I can't any longer.
Great. Thank you. So let's get to some questions we have here tonight. The first one is from Christine Marzano. Thank you, Christine, so much. She said, I have a question for Grandmaster Cook. As I have reviewed Palge Palchan, there is a part of it towards the end where we come around to horse stance and our right hand is open and our left hand is closed. Why do we have the right hand open?
Oh, that's a great question.
I know, I love this.
Not only do I like that question, but it shows that our students are
Thinking.
Are even more than thinking. They're trying to apply the motions to practical applications.
Right.
You know? And that's good because it's a real tragedy to think of forms as merely a dance. You know, every motion in your pumse has a bunhei, or an analysis, or a practical application. And if Master Adams would allow me, I can show you what's happening at that point. I hope we don't mind the non-social distancing. But what's happening, if you can go into a defense stance, sir, and then I want you to step forward with that leg and punch with that hand, okay? So here's one motion from Palge Palchang. Now, what I'm doing is coming around here and locking his elbow against my rib cage with my hand open. So a lock. Meanwhile, with this hand, I'm doing an elbow strike to his back, right? Or it could be reversed. The right hand open, the left hand closed. So I have my wrist lock here, and I'm breaking his elbow, and I'm coming in with an open. I'm hitting him. Sorry, Bob.
That's okay.
And I'm hitting him with an elbow strike, an open hand elbow strike. So take a look at that graphically one more time.
Sure.
So he steps in with that punch. This is the motion just before that. I sneak my arm around. I come around, and this hand is closed. This one is open. Right hand's open, left hand closed. And I have his elbow positioned in such a way that it's against my rib cage. Snap that elbow and bring the elbow strike in. Right? Now, I know Master Adams' back is bad right now. Sorry, sir.
It's okay.
I hope maybe that was a little therapeutic for him, you know. But that's the practical application of that. And boy, I'll tell you what, you couldn't get a better explanation. I could have talked about it, but a better explanation would be to show you.
Right.
And almost every motion in every pumse, this is why
Correct.
I tell you that pumses are teachers in their own right. And that's exactly what's going on there. So there's nothing ambiguous about it either. You know, we talk about people trying to search for a deep hidden meaning in all the techniques, and they come up with all these interpretations. Some of them are meaningful, but a lot of them are not, you know, and a lot of them are impractical when you really get down to it. And again, we talked about Occam's razor by William of Ockham, right? Who was a monk in the 13th century, and basically he proposed a theorem, and that's still used in science today, that all things being equal, the simplest answer is probably the right one, right? So
I used that this week by coincidence.
well, I'll tell you what, in this case, it certainly seems that way,
Yes.
in Taekwondo.
Yeah.
I hope that helped. And great question, Christine. I hope you're watching.
Yeah, and Christine, that is actually one of my favorite motions in all the forms, except maybe the Choki form has some really good applications too, because this is a great opportunity. The open hand, live hand, it just seems to deliver more power.
Yeah, and you know, Master Adams brings up a good point there too. He just said live hand. What the devil is that? What's live hand? You know, if you study any Hapkido, Hapkido defined as harmonizing ki, the way of harmonizing ki. And it's a martial art unto itself, and basically it's our Hoshin Suls taken to a much more refined level. And they have a technique called live hand, and the live hand allows ki to flow through the meridians in a certain way, but it also physically strengthens the arm in a different way than a clenched fist.
Correct.
So there are reasons why we have our hand open and have our hand closed.
I have always been fascinated by the little subtle changes that you can do and create such an out of proportion effect.
I understood that. I see what you mean.
You know, it's the hidden technique of the form, perhaps. And thank you, Christine, for seeing it and wondering about it, because you're right. It takes an inquiring mind to do that, and really wanting to know. And that's what our students really want to know, and that's what I'm really hoping we bring out in some of these programs.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you so much.
Oh,
Yeah, all the way around.
My pleasure. You know, one of the things, and I'm going to throw this out there, and I'd be interested in your take, is one of the things that I've said to people before. I don't know if I have scientific proof of it, but when I talk about other styles that I've seen, whether it be karate or Tai Chi Chuan or Kung Fu Mushu, it seems to me that the most efficient martial art with no wasted motions is Taekwondo.
He's not biased.
Well, everything you do, your chamber, has got purpose to it.
Yeah. I agree. Well, look, I made a joke and I said you're biased, but so am I in a very big way. You know, people accuse Taekwondo of being not even a self-defense system, and you know, and as much as I dislike saying it, it just shows their deep ignorance because they haven't delved in deep enough in the deep end of Taekwondo to find out what's really there. There was a woman named Jane Hallander. She was a very famous writer and a Kung Fu practitioner, wrote extensively for Black Belt magazine back in the 80s, you know. And she passed away not too recently, a few years back, but she wrote an article once that was really a landmark game changer for me, and it was called, "Is Taekwondo a True Method of Self-Defense?" You know, and then she went through the comparisons between traditional Taekwondo and other styles, and she talked about the sweeps and the locks, and that's not taught in typical Taekwondo, and all the other hand techniques and things like this. And her analysis at the end was absolutely as a form of self-defense, and a very comprehensive one and practical one as well.
I'd certainly agree with that. So, great. Thank you, Christine. See where the questions, I love the fact that the question can be simple, and then we go all the way around with a more in-depth look at the question. And I think that's so important. And not every school can do that. It's only because we're sitting here with Kwon Jin Nim that we can get to this level. Because there are owners of schools and masters who do not know what Kwon Jin Nim knows. And it's because I know what he knows, or at least some of what he knows, the extent of it, that I find these conversations to be so invaluable. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
That's so true. So I actually have a question from this time a question from Dr. David Dempster. And he wants to know, I think I know the answer here. Do you ever get nervous before a belt test? And if so, how do you deal with it?
It's an interesting question.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. But you know, my belt tests are so far apart now, you know. At my fifth, for instance, you were at my fourth Dan test. You actually assisted me at my fourth Dan test.
Yes, I did.
And that was one of my more memorable tests because it was at Grandmaster Chun's school.
Correct.
And if you remember, the room was packed with people,
yeah.
right? And I was the only one testing for fourth Dan, and I remember I did 4 bricks.
Yes.
And everybody was looking at that and wondering how, I was the only one who did bricks.
Yes.
And I remember when I walked up to the bricks, the room just fell silent, you know.
That's right.
And I heard up to the corner of my ear someone saying, "Oh, is he really going to do that?" And I know who said this. They said, "Well, if anybody can, he can do it," you know. And then I blasted through the bricks and the place went crazy, you know. But I was very nervous about that because I was worried that I would look foolish if I broke my wrist. But, you know, the nervousness that accompanies my belt test, because I do have such long periods of time in between, is a different kind of nervousness. It's more of a, I love to test myself, and I always like to perform in front of Grandmaster Chun to get the feedback that my progress was proper, you know. So for me, there's an anticipation involved. And I know what Dr. Dempster was thinking when I used the word anticipation, but we won't talk about it right now. But yeah, I mean, I get nervous, sure I do. And at my 6-dan test in particular, I got nervous because I had a whole stack of bricks there too. I think I had 5 bricks at that point. And my wife was there, and one of my daughters was there, and that was at Sokol.
Yes,
Grandmaster Alejandro's school. And I really thought up right until the last moment that I was going to have problems doing that. And if I had become injured in front of my family, I would have felt terrible. But went right through those bricks, never thought anything about it.
So 2 questions. The first one is, as you approached those bricks, what were you thinking and what got you through them?
Yeah. Another good question. I mean, number one, when students come to me and they ask me, Master Cook, can I break bricks for my test? I tell them, and this is really important, and I tell them, yes, you can if you allow me to train you to do it. And it's going to take several months prior to the break to do it, because so many students, you remember Jason Gaillard.
Oh,
right?
yes, yes.
Jason was a good friend of ours and a student, and he was the one who painted that entire shrine. I miss him terribly, and I'm finding it hard to get in touch with him these days. I hope that maybe we'll reconnect. But he told me horror stories about different schools that he'd been to where people consistently would go up to the brick and hit it and break their hand over and over again. It's because their master didn't take them aside and show them the metaphysical necessity of how to break that brick. So the question about what I was thinking and you know, how I went through it is you have to cultivate a mind that is, yes, and we talk about this all the time, mushim, you know, totally empty of the mind and filled with nothing but courage and indomitable will. And then you have to allow yourself to be encased in ki and know that you have the universal energy to penetrate absolutely anything. And then you go ahead and execute it.
So you firmly believe that not only you can, but you will.
Yes, exactly. That's a good way of putting it. Well, a very good way of putting it.
That is something I think everybody should, the next time you break, at the next belt test, I think everybody should take that advice and put it into practice. Because it's only through focused, mental, physical, spiritual focus that they all have to come together.
All come together, right, at one time. And you know, how did you just put it there? Not only do you know, how did you say it?
Oh, about that you can do it, but that you will do it.
You see, the reason we break wood is not because we're trying to impress somebody. At least it's not the reason we should. I know there are many, how should we say it, martial arts daredevils out there who do a lot of breaks for impression show purposes. That's fine. You know, demonstrations are great. They really are. And when you do a really remarkable demonstration, you really get people's attention, right?
Yes.
So that publicizes Taekwondo in a different way, which is good. But the point is, for the typical martial artist, you're breaking a solid object not to impress anybody or to show off. You're doing it to demonstrate to yourself and your teacher that you have penetrating power, right? Able to penetrate almost any target. There was a Okinawan master or a Japanese master, I'm not sure which, that always bragged about his ability to go through bull's skin and rip out their hearts, right? Well, as it turns out, on his deathbed, he admitted he never did that, right? But the point is, human flesh is very elastic, you know. To go through human flesh is not as easy as you would think it is, right? But to break a bone, it does take a certain amount of force, and it's not the same amount of force for each bone, as you can well imagine. But it does take a certain amount of force. So if you can break a 1-inch pine board, chances are you can break almost any bone in the body.
I agree.
And you know, these are brutal things we're saying, but they're true because we're talking about self-defense. So this is one of the reasons why you do the break. The other reason why you do the break, besides the physical manifestation of it, is to prove to yourself that you have the mental power to break through adversity. And the thicker the piece of the wood, the bigger amount of adversity you can probably break through. And guess what? We're breaking through adversity right now that's unmeasured until today, right?
Right. That's
We,
right.
we, in our lifetime, really haven't come across adversity like this now. So the question is, can you break through it? Do you have the indomitable will to break through it, or are you too weak to do it, you know? And we as martial artists are given the tools in so many ways to deal with what we're dealing with today. But, you know, the bottom line is you have to be sincere about your training.
I'm going to make a statement, and feel free to add what you think here. This past weekend, it was Memorial Day weekend.
Right.
It was a beautiful weekend for a couple days, and I noticed something. People were running around like maniacs outside. Kids were racing their cars. It was like a display, I'm free, I can finally go outside. And what I noticed about it, it was out of control. And to me, a martial artist always has to keep his energy in control, or else you're not a martial artist.
I couldn't agree more. It's one of the tenets of Taekwondo, self-control.
Self-control.
You know, we're all humans. There's no question about it. We have our faults and our flaws, you know, foils and flaws and things like this. But when you enter the martial arts, and if you have a proclivity or propensity for becoming a good martial artist, you know, when that means wrapping yourself around Asian philosophy, melding it with your Western thought, you know, then you take the 5 tenets that we talk about, and not only do they have a martial application, but they have a moral application as well, obviously, right? So just like the yang, or just like a coin with 2 sides, every good martial artist should compare those two to find out where they lie. In other words, in courtesy, if we talk about, I'm not going to go through all of them, but talk about courtesy, how do we apply that in daily life? Holding a door open for an elderly person, doing whatever we can to interface kindly with other people, right? But how do we do it in martial arts? When we're doing one-step sparring, for instance, right, we make sure that we don't hit somebody so hard that they become injured, or if we're doing Hoshin tools, we don't go beyond the breaking point.
Right.
We listen for the tap out. You know, this is a matter of courtesy. We bow to seniors, you know, which comes all, like you like to say, all the way around back again to what we were talking about at the beginning of this session. And same thing with all the tenets, self-control. You know, how do you establish self-control in the martial arts, and how do you apply it morally to your life? This is why these tenets are so important, because they have a multifaceted approach to them. And you, as you said, a martial artist should be in possession of all of those tenets at any one given time.
Right. Okay. I could talk more about it, but I want to get to some more questions.
Yes.
So, I've got a question here from Kevin Kovac. Thank you, Kevin. I appreciate your question. Please, some more like this. He says, "Hi, Grandmaster Cook.
Hi, Kevin.
I like the Kicho forms. They seem to emulate the Taekyoku katas.
That's correct.
Are there equivalents for the Heian series of katas in Taekwondo?"
Yes. What happened was the Taekyoku forms were established, and they were difficult for the Japanese people to pronounce or write in their pictograms, or the way they write, you know, their calligraphy. And so Gichin Funakochi changed the name from Taekyoku to Heian forms. Now, the forms are the exact same forms as the Pinan forms in Okinawa, which were established by Itosu. And, you know, martial arts history is very, I was thinking about this earlier today, they're very profuse, you know, because they always say that history is written by the victor, right?
Yes.
So what happens is occasionally you'll get offshots of, or even deeper examination come up with different stories, right? But most people say that it was Anko Itosu who developed the pin-on forms, with 5 pin-on forms, basically for school children, elementary school children, high school children. When those forms were imported to China, to Japan by Gichin Funakoshi, he changed the name to Heian forms. The Taekwondo forms, by the way, are our Kicho forms, right?
Okay.
Are our Kicho forms. But the pin-on forms became known as Heian forms because they were easier for the Japanese people to pronounce. When they came to Korea, we called them the Pyongan forms, right? The Pyongan forms. So you have the Kicho forms that were known as the Taekwondo forms that were established by Jigo Funakoshi, supposedly, who was Gichin Funakoshi's son. But the pin-on forms became known as the Heian forms and then the Pyongan forms.
So, Heian Nidan, Heian Yodan, is that 1 and 2? What?
Chodan would be the lesser of.
Right.
And then there was Shodan and so on and so forth. Those are the Japanese pronunciations for them.
Okay.
And they correspond to the 5 pin-on forms.
Okay.
Or in our case, it would be Pyongan Chodan, which would be the first one, Pyongan Idan, Pyongan Samdan, Pyongan Sadan, and Pyongan Odan.
Right, the way we say it.
Correct.
He mentions that he feels that Heian Nidan and Heian Yodan are very pretty forms. And I find that that's certainly an acceptable way to look at them.
Sure, and it's a good way to look at them too. I agree because, you know, one I've written long ago in a magazine about the name of the article was "Do It for the Art." In other words, many times and of course we espouse this all the time, when you're doing your forms, you should do them in a military style. But every once in a while, you want to maybe step away from that brutal military thought and perform the Pumse Hyung Tool simply because of the moving meditation of it, because of the art, the spatial movement through the spatial plane, you know?
Right.
And yes, maybe then they are, I won't say devolving into a dance, but becoming a dance. No sense in denigrating dance, you know? I mean, I guess my wife would be a better person to talk about this, obviously, but because she has degrees in dance, but a dance is an art. And there's a spiritual uplifting that happens when you see the performance.
Right.
Something happens the same way you listen to a symphony. You know, there's no real describable thing that happens other than an action on the spirit that makes you feel a certain way. So there's no reason why you shouldn't call a form beautiful, and there's no reason why you shouldn't do it from time to time in a meditative state rather than just purely a combative state.
They say that the reason why classical music is so meditative and so good for somebody to sit and listen to is because it resonates, it actually vibrates the 12 cranial nerves.
Interesting.
And I'm wondering, has anybody ever done a study on the pathophysiology of what happens in the body when you do a form?
You know, I have to tell you that Master Vitali can confirm this too. There are an awful lot of self-professed scholars out there on martial arts, you know, and I would even say I'm one of them, to be honest with you, and you know, because I don't really hold a degree per se, but this is all self-study, and anytime you have self-study, you have holes, you know, in the study because no one's there to guide you, you know, in that regard. Although I've been fortunate because I had Grandmaster Chun and I had other teachers who kind of guided me, but the point is I wouldn't be surprised if someone says they did, but without any really clinical proof involved in it. So it would be certainly a very, very worthwhile paper that I'd love to read. You know?
Yes.
That would be something to publish in Hunlian magazine. We didn't really talk about Hunlian magazine.
Ah, there it is.
Right? There it is. By the way, advertisement. Hunlian is the journal of the United States Taekwondo Association, and it's published twice yearly. On this cover is a picture of Grandmaster Heel Cho and an interview with him. Past issues have had Grandmaster Gyohan Lee and Grandmaster Richard Chun and Master Wanda Furiello, who was one of Grandmaster Chun's senior students. But we really try to include scholarly articles, or at least articles that have been well researched and pertain to Korean culture, only Korean culture. And we're very picky and very discriminatory about keeping it Taekwondo and keeping it Korean, you know. So, Master Adams, I strongly urge you to look into that and see what you can come up with on that, because that would be something that would definitely be worthwhile.
Yeah, I'd love to see, what do the brainwaves look like? Do they change? Did they change from the beginning to the end? What happens in the middle? I'd be interested if somebody did a blood study and looked at what enzymes were flowing, at various points.
Well, no one can do it better than you, possibly Dr. Dempster, together.
Maybe we'll
You
work
have a
together.
medical background.
Yes, sir.
You know the right questions
Yes.
to ask.
Yeah,
You got him now.
Dr. Dempster, we're going to have a conversation about this, because I think this needs to be answered. I really
think
do.
it's a great subject to cover, yeah. See, we unmask things here. We dig up buried treasure is what we do.
That's a great way to describe it. That's true. Let me bring this back down to where we are and the whole situation. And do we have any definitive news on dates of when things are going to happen here?
You mean as far as reopening goes?
Yes.
Yeah. Patty and I are constantly on the New York State website, and I'm in touch with our local authorities through Supervisor Michael Sweeten, who's been very, very helpful.
I'll bet.
And gets back to us immediately and kind of guides us through the maze of what's going on.
He's a great guy, yeah.
A very effective man, as is our mayor, Michael Newhart. And right now, this is uncharted territory that we're going through right now. And so you really can't come down on any one individual, couple I could say I come down on. But I mean, you can't really come down on too many people and say, look, how come I can't get a definitive answer? We are still searching. And right now, supposedly there are 4 phases of opening any business or whatever. And we can't seem to fit in, we can't find where we fit in as a martial arts school yet. But I see certain businesses open around town that are not exactly like our business, but close to it. And it gave me hope to think that maybe within the next few weeks we can open up as a school. I'm finding that's probably not likely. It's probably going to be somewhere around phase 4 that we're going to be allowed in. And that could be several months before it actually happens. Now, what does that mean? To me personally, it means that I'm in deep trouble financially, But our students have been such that because we are offering programs like this and our live streaming classes, that tuition has flowed in, even though we've lost a great many students.
Sure.
Because, quite frankly, because of fear, because of ignorance on how to even sign on to a live streaming class. And then once you get up in front of a computer, standing there all alone in your dobak, and having the wherewithal to train, become your own teacher.
It's daunting.
It's been very, very tough. And we've been doing well. But some of my colleagues are on the verge of bankruptcy at this point.
I can imagine.
And I'm very sad. I feel very, very bad for them. And all I can tell them is do your best, get creative. We hit the ground literally
right away.
Sprinting.
I know.
It was the day after the shutdown that we began our live stream class.
Correct, I remember.
So by this time, everybody's gotten into the routine of it. But to try to pick it up right now is going to be pretty hard for people, So to answer your question outright, I don't know when we're going to reopen again. But being an owner of a school, it's my responsibility and Patty's responsibility to prepare for it. So we're asking our instructors how they feel. We're asking our students how they feel, and we're out there looking at the web for things like disinfectants and wipes and things that we're going to need a big supply of that are being sucked up by every business right now.
Right. Do you think that we fit in with gyms?
I think that's probably likely.
What would you say if somebody said, I want to train, but I'm afraid to train with all the exhalation and movement? Can I wear a mask?
Absolutely. And probably at the beginning, everyone may need to wear a mask. It may be one of the
Requirements.
I think it's probably going to be one of the requirements. And we're going to mark off the floor to make sure people are 6 feet away from each other. This is some of the variables that just recently I heard someone was saying 6 feet is not enough these days.
Correct.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Other people have said that. I just heard on CNN, Sanjay Gupta, the physician
Gupta.
that they have, said that 6 feet is too much. You can actually be a lot closer and still be safe. So who do you believe? I mean, that's why we're trying to navigate this maze of knowledge.
Yes.
Difficult.
There are some very interesting studies out there. I was just talking to a friend of mine who's still working as a paramedic in the city. And I said, Dave, you were working in Brooklyn and the Bronx, 2 of the worst hot spots in New York, for weeks. And he thought he might have had some of the symptoms, so they pulled him off the line. Mm-hmm. And they gave him 2 tests. He was negative. So he did not get it. He had some pleuritic chest pain. It had nothing to do with the virus. And I said to him, Dave, how did you keep from getting the virus with all these people all around you in a small area, in an apartment, and in the back of the ambulance, breathing the same air? And he very simply said, because masks work.
Masks work, yes. Good point, Bob. That's a statement that's very important. Masks work.
Masks work.
That's true.
Yes, they do.
Now, I was speaking to our landlord just earlier today. I mentioned this during class. We're running out of time. But he's a fireman in New York City as well. And I asked him how things were down at the firehouse. He said 16 of his colleagues caught it, right? Because they're in saving people who have it,
Right.
And then I hope I'm not breaking any confidentialities here, but I asked him, I said, did you get it? He says, yeah. And I said, how did you feel? He goes, felt like a cold. And I was fine, actually, So I like to tell that story only because it shows hope. You hear the story, you get it, you're going to die. You're not going to die most of the time, right? I'm not going to say you're not going to die, but most of the time it's probably not as fierce as people make it out to be. I certainly don't want to check it out, but who knows?
The statistics are actually quite clear. 85% of the people who get it have a mild cold or flu. 85%. The other 15% are going to get a bad case. And it's not clear why certain people get it and other people don't. There seems to be a propensity for males with A positive blood types. Why does that affect? Nobody knows. We don't know anything about this.
Yeah, right.
But
we're still learning.
5% can die, and the other 10% can have life changes in their whole life, the way they breathe, the way, the strokes and heart attacks, and it's pretty scary.
Let's go back to a martial arts question.
Yes, martial arts.
Get away from this for a second.
So we're kind of out of time. So you see that maybe we're going to be in the last phase,
right.
But you feel that people will be allowed to wear masks and may be required to wear masks.
Oh, absolutely, no question.
If
they're willing to come back into the dojang. My polls that I've taken in the last few days have been interesting in that people are eager to come back, but they are afraid to come back.
Yes.
So Patty and I are going to do everything we possibly can to make the dojang safe, and we will follow all local and federal and state guidelines on how to make and keep our students safe. Safety is number one, period.
Number one. When I was studying for my test, I studied with my wife Ginny, instructor Danielle Roche, and Mark McNutt. And we wore masks. It was sort of, it was several weeks back when people were really wondering, how easy is this to catch? And I will tell you that you can do Taekwondo with a mask on. But you can't do 45 minutes without sitting down for a moment or breathing, taking your mask off and just taking a couple deep breaths and then putting the mask back on.
Right.
And I have a good mask. So that was just my experience.
Good experience. Good,
Yeah,
good information.
but it can be done.
Yeah, good
And
information.
I plan on doing it. So I think we're out of time. I think it was a really excellent round of discussion on lots of different issues. So I thank you once again.
Thank you, Master Adams, for arranging this. This is all Master Adams' creation, and I really feel that he's followed through and exceeded his hopes. It certainly has exceeded mine, and I really enjoy doing this, and I look forward to it. And I'm looking forward to inviting guests to come on, too. Master Vitale, for one.
Yes,
And
love to have
other
them.
guests that we have from around the world, We'll have some surprises coming up.
Good. Thank you very much. Please keep the questions coming in. I love to hear your questions, your comments. All these questions are good, and as you can see, it can be a very simple question that really gets a very complex answer because there's so much to it. It is not just kicking and punching. It's so much more. And I think that's where I'll leave it with everybody. So thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Adams.
Thank you, everybody. And I hope to see you all again next week. Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.